Today's featured guest is Gary Ray, the owner of Black Diamond Games in Concord, California. Gary was a man with a set of specialized skills as well as controversial opinions. In this episode, we discuss the games industry at large, the bubble-like nature Magic has been experiencing for the last 5 years, and the skills Gary used to build an excellent game business. There are a lot of gems in this episode over the course of the conversation, so let's just get right to it.
I'm Gary Ray, owner of Black Diamond Games in Concord, California. And I've been doing this for about, this is my 11th year.
Fantastic. So, how did you get into the games business?
I made the horrible mistake that many make, which is thinking that I could do better. And it's a horrible mistake because the bar is low, and then suddenly you have a game store.
Okay.
It might not be exactly what you were expecting.
No, that's a fair answer. Was there somebody you had in mind that you're like, this is a business that I can improve on?
There were a couple of store owners that had shopped at a local store, and then the owner of that store went away to school, and that store kind of fell apart. And we both kind of at the same time realized that we could do a better job at this, and there's opportunities. So that's what we did. I don't know if I should name names, but I'll say Endgame in Oakland and in my store, Chris over there had that same idea, shopping at Gamescape in San Rafael.
Okay. So what was your plan to improve? What did you think you could do better?
Well, I was under this mistaken idea that people had similar tastes that I did. My taste tended to be a little more esoteric.
Tell me more.
So I tended to be the guy who would make cities out of Miniature Building Authority and enormous dungeons out of Dwarven Forge. I tended to like the fancy things, and I was annoyed that the local stores didn't carry them. It turned out there was a reason they didn't carry them. They were very hard sells. There were not enough people willing to spend that kind of money on their Dungeons and Dragons games.
So how did that turn out for you? Did you originally try and sell those products?
Oh yeah, I did it all wrong. I got a home equity line on my house, which is how I funded my first store, and brought in everything at once, which is the wrong way to do things. I did things like role-playing games. I know what I play, but let's bring in all of them. Not like, what are the most popular ones? What are you most likely to sell? Let's just bring in the core books. It was a shock and awe approach to role-playing. In one respect, people learned really quick that I was the place to go for that stuff. On the other hand, it took me years to unwind those mistakes because they really, most people didn't buy those things. And people who are giving me advice tend to give me advice on things they already owned. So that wasn't helpful. And I had, I had every Miniature Building Authority item and a wall of Dwarven Forge. It was an awesome store, my dream store, but it was not at all financially viable as a game store.
Perfect as a clubhouse, but maybe not an actual hobby business.
Yeah. And no game space because I was told that wasn't necessary. So it was really not a viable thing. IT taught me that you can learn skills quickly and adapt. To my credit, I devoted myself to learning the trade, threw myself into it, and turned that mess around, which took years. That was part of it. At the time, it didn't really matter that much because I'm in the Bay Area. The housing prices are booming. I considered myself a gentleman farmer. All I had to do was make my rent, plow my fields, and not go broke. My house was appreciating 10 grand a month, so everything was good. That was how that started. And then eventually, housing crisis, financial meltdown, things got real. It was an interesting start.
Okay, so let's just stop there for a second and talk about that. How did the 2008 period and on really affect your business?
Well, I moved to the new store in 2007. I went from kind of being that gentleman farmer to really having to understand nuts and bolts of the business, because once your rent exceeds your ability to ever pay it with a full-time job, you are now running the business. And if the business can't survive, you have no choice but to close it. You can't just go back to your day job. There's no fallback. That had a big change. As far as the actual financial crisis, my house crashed in value, and financially I was kind of ruined personally, figure my way out of. But the store itself wasn't affected. In fact, the game trade in general, they will tell you, and it's true, I think, is counter-cyclical. So if things are going bad in the economy, as long as your customers have jobs to buy things, they will buy your things. They won't buy the same things, but they'll be more value oriented.
Yeah, the argument is kind of like they could go and see a movie for $10 with an hour's worth of entertainment, or they can spend $10 at your store and get potentially tens, 20s of hours out of whatever you just purchased, right? So one board game lasts way longer than a single movie ticket.
And it's a psychological thing that happens. It happens fairly quickly in the beginning, and then it takes years to unwind. So in my example, I was making 10 grand a year of equity on my home, paper equity, not real money. And psychologically, I'm fairly wealthy. So I can go and spend, there's an interesting role-playing book. I will probably never use that, but I will buy it anyway because I like the cover. There were a lot of products in the game trade that existed, especially role-playing games, that no one played. No one really played most of those games, right? But they bought the book because they had interesting content. Well, the recession hit, and once people realized where they were at, they stopped. There were products where people just stopped buying them. And a lot of the role-playing books that were kind of fringy, people just stopped cold. And a lot of those companies are gone now. Same thing with indie miniatures. You're not buying $15 miniatures imported from France anymore. So a lot of the product in the store shifted. I mean, we clearance out stuff, we bring in new stuff. It takes time to do that. But sales in general were up. I think that's true for most stores that survived. There were some places like Vegas where entire communities evaporated overnight. People were bailing on their houses in record numbers. Neighborhoods were just eviscerated. Those stores failed. They had no customers. But as long as your customers were there and they were employed, you were okay.
Yeah, so I guess if your city, your local area kind of made it, your business most likely kind of made it too.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair.
Okay. I was curious how the Great Recession, as they're calling it now, would impact a hobby business. It's good to know that it's actually fairly safe.
Yeah, those are not the things to worry about. The things to worry about are like what we're experiencing now. We're experiencing a couple different bubbles right now. And the question is, how long-term are these? Are they actually bubbles? How do you know if it's a bubble? And coming off the housing market, housing bubble was 20 years long. So if you could predict something's going to be 20 years, it's kind of a trend and you can take advantage of it. But if you can't, then it's really dangerous.
So what are you most concerned about? If you're talking about bubbles in the world economy or in the United States economy, what's on your radar right now?
I'm not concerned. I'm never concerned about the general economy because I've learned that I worry about it all the time and it tends not to affect me at all. What I mostly worry about are things like there's two kind of bubbles now. The big one that everybody talks about is the magic bubble. Right? There's a huge magic bubble. Magic sales have probably tripled in the last 5 years. Game stores are now acting like real businesses. They have money now and they're acting like real people. I mean, it's not how it normally operates. So there's a problem where if the bubble bursts, a lot of these people who think they're running real businesses are going to be suddenly thrust into the same old game trade where it's much tighter. And I don't believe that most of them have the skills to survive that. So there's a lot of nuts and bolts skills that you need to survive in the game trade during regular times that are hard won. That takes you a long time to learn them. And I think most new stores don't have those skills. So there's a risk that those stores could fail and take out distributors. This has happened before. There's a ripple effect and it can, and the established stores may be okay. They may not be. Depends on how overextended you are. For example, we're looking to move. We're looking to move to a much bigger space. But the reason to do that is that Magic is driving our need for event space, right? So that means we're going to move to a bigger space or we're going to build a bigger space. We're going to have much more financial exposure from that. Right? We're going to have thousands of dollars a month more cover. We're going to have event space that assumes we're going to have tournaments with over 100 people. And if Magic doesn't deliver on that promise,
it would pull back a little bit.
I kind of know what I'm doing. So I won't go so far that I can't survive without it. But there's a lot of people that this is all there is for them. This is all they really need. So yeah, there's definitely a concern over a Magic bubble. That's a big thing.
Okay. You talked about skills as business owners that you feel that most LGS guys, they don't have, or they're just not ready for. What are the specific skills that you think they should have?
Well, most of them aren't diversified. That's the big thing. If there is a Magic apocalypse, there's nothing to fall back on. They're just gone. Once they are diversified, they need to know the lifeblood of a retail store is inventory. They need to know how to manage inventory. They don't understand things like turn rates. They don't understand how to get a return on their investment. Here's a good example. Average game store probably does 3 to 4 turns a year, meaning everything in your store sold 3 times. And that was really good. My Magic singles sell 5 times a month. That's something like 50 to 60 times a year. This is not the same universe that I lived in before. And that's the universe that these guys live in now. And they're not going to be able to survive in that old world. So just inventory management, day-to-day, pushing down on your expenses. Net profit for retail is usually in the 3 to 5% range.
Yeah.
And right now, these guys are seeing phenomenal profits. They're able to open stores. They're able to open second and third stores that are hitting sales levels that would take you 5 years to get to.
Yeah.
And that's just real. So some of them are stepping up and some of them are learning. They go to trade shows, they study, they read the books and stuff. But a lot of them are just kind of riding the wave.
Interesting.
Yeah, I talk about that. I'm presenting at trade shows now, especially things like inventory management. I'm looking to see where people are at. And it's a little scary.
So how did you get the skills? How did you learn all of these things that have helped you out so much?
I listened to the masters. I started going to trade shows like literally on day one. I went to my first trade show in October of 2004, and I had quit my job the day before.
Okay.
Flew to Wisconsin, and the notary showed up at my hotel so I could sign papers to refinance my house, which really I should have done before I'd quit my job, but I just didn't care. So that's how intent I was to do this and how quick I was to jump on the education side of things. I went to the trade shows. I participated in the forums. I have a blog I've been writing since 2007. I have about 1,000 blog entries. I get a lot of pushback and I get a lot of, rounds me out by talking to other retailers. At this point, I'm helping other people. I'm on forums and I've done a little bit of consulting work as well. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm trying to help other people get through this, look at their numbers and give them advice.
Okay. Fantastic. That's great. I can identify with that.
Yeah.
So what is the specific reason that you feel Magic is a bubble? Is it just the growth over the last 10 years just too much? Or is there something else that's really standing out?
No one can tell you something's a bubble until it bursts. Nobody can say that, right? And the housing bubble lasted 20 years, 25 years, to the point where I'm in my 40s, if you bought a house in your 20s and you're now in your 40s, your entire reality is bubble. That's normal. So it's hard to tell until you're out of it that it was actually a bubble. So there's a question, is there a bubble? Is there not a bubble? There's definitely huge, strong upward sales. I think it had a lot to do with World of Warcraft.
How so?
When I started in 2004, RPG community just disappeared. Overnight, they were just gone. And they were all playing WoW. WoW was the big thing. And it hurt a lot of stores. Some closed, actually. Then there was a point where WoW started losing steam. I think it was probably, I'm trying to think when that was, like 2008, 2009. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that feels about right.
They were sloughing off something like 1 million players a month. 1 million people a month were being spun out of the WoW orbit. And a lot of them were looking for something to do. And they were older. D&D wasn't really vibrant at the time. And they went to Magic. So this Magic idea is WoW was kind of dissipating. WoW Magic was on the upswing. And that was kind of my theory that what jump-started it. So then my theory is like, well, my question is, what would have to happen with Magic for it to lose that momentum? And it'd have to be, you can envision another MMO, some other phenomena, some virtual reality device, something. We're always looking for that thing over the horizon.
I guess you can say it's already sort of happening, at least in some senses, with Hearthstone. Hearthstone has become immensely popular. It's kind of like Blizzard's World of Warcraft too, right? So many people have gone from playing Magic to playing Hearthstone because it's a different model. It's quick, it's easy, it's fun, it's entertaining. There's a lot of pros that are no longer playing Magic. They're playing Hearthstone on their streams.
It could be a thing. I don't think the game trade has noticed a huge dip or anything. Maybe what we need is more games like that to release the steam to keep things on track, to keep things from overheating.
And make it more sustainable.
Like some of the Magic sets that have come out in the last couple of years have been kind of lackluster, and some stores have closed. Some stores took deep chances on that, went deep on it, and they failed. That's kind of what you need, some culling of the herd, things that you eat in winter every once in a while.
Yeah, that's right. I guess all it would really, or something that could be a problem is all it would take is for Wizards of the Coast to release another Mercadian Masks or a Homelands expansion of something on that level. And you could actually see a lot of people really just like, nah, I'm going to sit this season out. And that could really turn a lot of places off.
I went through the Kamigawa block, and at that point, I didn't have any OP in the store, and Magic went down to nothing for me. I was okay because it was like 10% of my sales. But nowadays, it would be pretty devastating for a lot of stores, including mine. But these are interesting theoretical questions, really. I mean, there's also a board game boom right now as well. I actually sell more board games than I sell Magic. And that's driven by things like tabletop, board games getting into mass consciousness where they weren't before. So there's a lot going on in the board game market, and that's actually bigger for us.
Do you think that's a California thing, or is that something with your store? What's the trend? Why?
It's a national thing. It's definitely a national thing. It's big. You can open up a Magic store very quickly and take advantage of that. But there tends to be a couple big players in every marketplace for board games. We're that player. It's not quite as universal, but it is huge. It's out there and it's big. It just doesn't have the kind of universal effect that Magic does, where any store can do it, which is another problem.
Yeah. Going back a little bit, you mentioned that before you didn't have play space. And this is something that I wanted to talk about specifically. Why didn't you have space with your original model? And then also, why did you switch? And how does it affect your business?
It wasn't considered essential. This was like 2004. This was the advice I got. I did a lot of research. I didn't have it. And truthfully, I didn't need to have it. You don't need to have game space to run a game store. You could have a store, be one guy, and open. You could do like a 9-to-5 kind of job, or 11-to-7, which is what I did, and go home and see your family at the end of the day, not run any events. You can survive. It's just not anywhere near as profitable as events. Events drive sales substantially. So when I moved to the bigger space, I went from about 900 square feet to 3,300 square feet, where we're at now. We're about to go even higher. Yeah, it was a huge jump. It's scary. And we have about 1,000 square feet of game space now. And I had no metrics to figure out how to pay for that rent, right? So that rent is an extra, let's call it $2,500 a month for empty space. Right? And I had learned how to maximize my turns, my inventory management, to get the numbers I needed to pay my expenses and make profit based on inventory, right? So I looked at this 2,500 square feet of dead space, and I said, I have no idea how to monetize that. So I brought in enough new inventory to the store to cover that space based on my factoring the turn rates and stuff. That new inventory was diversifying into toys, which another local store was doing. It seemed to work for them, but they had kids nearby. So I brought all this inventory in, and it completely bombed, completely failed. All things being equal, the store should have failed. But what I discovered is that inventory didn't do anything. What I discovered is having the game space increased my sales 60%.
Big jump.
Which is what I needed to cover my expenses and continue.
It worked out pretty well and absorbed one downfall with the game space.
Exactly. And then, it's like inventory. It takes a couple years to cycle it out, and then you've got profit again. You can retune your store for that. So that was my game space revelation.
Cool. That's how I always felt about it. The stores that I've seen that have a table space for Magic tournaments, board games, or tabletop, all that stuff, I feel like they're always more energized. There's more going on. There's more people buying. It always kind of felt that way. But to actually get some, like a good number, a good hard example that how it affected your business, that's very interesting.
It really does that. I mean, it builds community. Community becomes the soul of your store. It's not an area that I enjoy managing. I delegate that whole process because I'm more of a nuts and bolts kind of guy. Event management gives me a headache, but it's definitely where it's at.
But that's a fair perspective to have. That's why you hire people to take care of that thing, right? Find people who want to do that, have that strength.
Exactly. There's people that are doing it, that are miserable, and they just need to learn to delegate.
So how do you utilize your game space? What kind of events do you hold in your store?
We have 14 events a week. We're open 10 to 10 every day. We've got all types of events throughout the week. We have 3 nights of Magic, which is the big money maker. We've got a couple of D&D and Pathfinder events. We've got, Warhammer 40K and Privateer Press with, War Machine and Hordes. We've got, we have a full spectrum store, so we run a full spectrum of events, and they're all at capacity. We have a problem, so we're expanding the store next year to add another 1,000 square feet.
It's not a terrible problem to have.
We're building a mezzanine level on our second floor to accommodate.
Sounds exciting.
Yeah, exciting and terribly nerve-wracking.
Yeah. A little more overhead and a little more risk, I suppose.
We're actually not going to pay rent on it. We're paying to build it, and our property managements do the actual building, and in exchange, we don't have to pay rent on it. That's kind of how I manage the risk of that.
Well, that's not a bad deal.
So I have a loan to do the construction because it's very expensive. I can start another store with that money if I wanted to, but I don't have the risk of moving or having extra rent.
Interesting. Yeah. This is still kind of in the plans, right?
It's been going on for 3 years. So something's going to happen early next year. Either going to build it or move to a bigger space, but I'm really hoping we can get the expansion.
Much rather have that. Moving is a terrible experience. Moving is probably way worse than moving an apartment or a house.
I was talking to my father about this because he's like, really? You want to move? That sounds really risky. And if you think about it, it's kind of like, imagine you were working at a job for 10 years and you decided to switch jobs, right? You go to a new company, and if you get fired from that company, you can never work again. That's kind of like what happens when you move your store and you fail. So,
yeah, that would feel pretty bad. How did you come up with the name Black Diamond Games?
I was going to do games based on regional parks. That makes sense. So I wanted to have a link to the community and Black Diamond. There's Black Diamond Regional Park in the area, so I wanted to name it after that. I live in another area that has Wildcat Canyon, so I was going to have a Wildcat game. I was going to have multiple game stores with different names. But I think 1 is a good number. So that's how I got that name. It was a Black Diamond Mines, a bunch of business Black Diamond because of that.
Gotcha.
It's not terribly creative, but that's kind of where it came.
But hey, it works. It's a good identity for your game store to have. I always find that interesting because the names for game stores are way more diverse and odd compared to other businesses.
Yeah, trying to avoid White's Dungeon.
That's a question I'm just curious about because usually there's a personal reason as to what you came up with, something you really liked. But
it was less personal. One of my main concerns is I don't want a gamer's den. I definitely started off with the idea of kind of like an enterprise. I wanted to bring in the general public. And I wasn't going to do that by painting the walls like a dungeon or having a funky name. So it needed to be upscale.
You need a little more broad appeal.
Broader appeal, or at least not narrow. Yeah.
Okay, that's a good answer. You mentioned that you blog pretty frequently. Is there a reason that you started doing that? And have customers ever come into your store because of your blog? Or is that for other store owners?
It's kind of interesting because I started kind of just to kind of journal our transition to the new store. And then there were topics I wanted to discuss, and I didn't feel like there was a place to do that online. It's interesting. I don't want to say it's an interesting blog because it's my blog, but I tend to talk about internal topics to the game trade in my store specifically. A lot of stuff that nobody talks about publicly. I mean, I've been accused of revealing the magician's tricks, letting people peek behind the curtain. Some people really don't like that I talk about the actual game trade in the blog. But I think it's interesting, and it definitely draws customers that appreciate it and those that will drive long distances and tell me they do so to support the store.
Because you reveal the details of your work life?
They appreciate the transparency. They appreciate the insight. We're in the culture now where everybody wants to know how things work. So I do it, and they do appreciate it. I have only had a couple people that didn't like it, mostly because it challenged their worldview of how this stuff works.
If you're putting out opinions that they don't hold, or you find kind of air quotes offensive or something. Yeah, I can see why I'd be a little annoyed by that.
I'm extremely opinionated on this stuff, and I'm not balanced. I don't give the balanced perspective. I give my perspective because it's my blog. Some people don't like that. They feel like, well, you don't speak for me or you don't speak for the game trade. I'm like, no, I never said I did.
If you want to speak for
I
yourself,
do.
start your own blog.
Yeah, start your own blog, damn it.
Seems fair.
So, I've been doing it every once in a while. I think I'm going to quit, but I just keep doing it. There's usually something that interests me, something to write about a few times a month, and I'll just write it. Sometimes it gets a big response, sometimes it doesn't, and I don't really care either way.
Do you get a lot of, most game store owners get a lot of customers who come in and tell you how much they love your store and how they would love to have a store just like it, or that kind of sentiment? For some reason, gamers, that's kind of like a common dream, I guess.
Yeah. They all want to do that. They all admit we try to make it look easy. They don't see behind the bathrooms.
They don't see the work behind the counter, behind the closed doors.
See the whole
games all day. Sounds great.
I try to make it look like theater work, right? We do rehearsals all the time and we set the stage. And then when the customers come in, everything is amazing. We perform for them. They don't have to see what actually goes into the process. The downside is customers then don't think there is a process. They don't think there's actually work involved. I get that most often when I try to hire people. They come in and they're like, oh, this looks like fun. We're just going to play games all day. So I was like, well, how do you feel about cleaning bathrooms?
Someone's got to do it.
And there are people who will. I've had customers start game stores locally because they disagreed with how I was doing something. It didn't work out so well.
Do you have an example? You don't have to name anybody, but what happened?
We had an interesting situation when I started the store. I didn't have community before. I started the store, I had game space, and there was a Magic community. They liked our space, but they didn't know us. There were 6 other stores in the area that are all gone now. And as they would fail, we'd absorb their communities. They didn't have loyalty. Half of them would leave us and go to another store, and that store would fail, and they'd come back to us. We had this feeling they didn't really care about us, so we didn't care about them. We didn't trust them, so we didn't want to invest in them. For example, we didn't do Magic singles because we didn't believe that if we invested in them, that community would stay. One of the guys who was one of the factions of this community decided that we should carry Magic singles, and I said, I'm not going to do it because, reasons. He went and started his own store. Half the community left and went over there, at least until they failed, and then they came back. And at a certain point, the judge community, who are the adults in this situation, said, no, we're here at your store now. We're going to stay here. We're not going to go anywhere. So, let's work together. And we kind of built some trust, and we molded the store a little more towards what they needed with that trust. Even when other stores popped up, they stayed. So, that reinforced that. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
I don't think there's some good points in there. But that's pretty interesting. So what were they doing wrong? If they found that this faction that opened up the rival store, they kind of saw that their Magic players wanted Magic singles, or at least that seems the need they identified, and they went and opened a business. What did they do wrong that caused them to fail?
Well, they did what a lot of stores do, is that they were grossly undercapitalized, have a grasp of their expenses, and they didn't have a grasp of how much Magic they were going to actually sell. So when they finally did close, the store changed ownership, and I actually got to see their financials because they asked me if I wanted to buy it, which is dumb because it was like a mile from my store and it would be kind of pointless. I looked at their financials and I was like, is this your weekly numbers? Because this is not very high. No, that's what we do in a month.
Yeah.
Their monthly numbers were my sales over a nice weekend. It was that bad. A lot of stores are surviving on that. I've got a friend who's got a store. His main objective, which he considers successful, is to pay his employees properly. Those are the kind of ambitions you have in a small Magic-oriented store. I one day wish to have insurance and payroll. And then we will know we have really made it.
I won't be paying myself, but I'll pay my employees. We'll be all set.
Peanut butter and sandwiches only go so far.
What would you tell these people when they come to you and say, I want to own my own store? What's the advice that you give them?
I'll tell you, first of all, I want to be honest with them and I don't want to discourage them, but I will discourage them. The main thing they're going to need is a lot of money. And it's more money than is sensible to put into a game store. You can run a Magic shop with not a lot of money. You can start a so-called game store that does specifically Magic for the cost of tables and chairs and a 1 month rent deposit, right? It doesn't take much.
Yeah.
But if they want to run a diversified game store that's going to survive no matter what, whether Magic's doing well or not, it's going to take a lot of money. And if they want to stand out in a crowd, I'm talking to people that have game stores in other parts of the country where rent's cheap, and they're in these metro areas, they're fighting against up to 10 stores with just a small number of people in the area. They're fighting against 10 stores because it's so cheap to open one of these casinos. So what you need if you want to avoid that is some heft. You need inventory is what you need. Right? You need to have some mass, because mass builds gravity, and gravity crushes everything in its orbit. That's how you survive in a difficult market, is you have that kind of mass that's derived from inventory. Inventory is expensive. So the main thing you need to start a store is a lot of cash for inventory. And we're talking maybe $25,000 to $50,000 of inventory to start. And we're talking a starting budget of anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 for the store. Honestly, if you have $100,000 and you're considering dropping it on a new game store, you probably should have your head examined. It's not the best investment. There are better ways to spend your money, better ways to start a business. And those are the kind of discussions I have with people. Do you have any other skills or anything else that you do now that you could go do on your own? Yeah, I would have been much better off quitting my job and doing IT consulting. It wouldn't take many hours a week for me to make the same amount of money running a game store without any of the risk.
It's an interesting position to have as a game store owner.
Yeah, I think most store owners who've been doing this for a while have gravitated toward that position. If you're going to do it, you're going to have a lot of money. But if you have a lot of money,
You probably shouldn't do it.
Yeah.
So I guess the real determining factor is how much they want to do it. If they have the money, they could go out and do any number of things with that money and probably generate more, get a better return with it. But if a game store is really what they want to do, if that's what they're passionate about, if that's their dream, then that's the factor they need. If they're just like, well, I think maybe a game store would be really cool, then you'd be like, no, you're not ready for this.
And the interesting thing is I've been giving that kind of advice for years now, and some of those stores are still around, and some of those stores are great stores. There's people I've talked to that I've given that speech to, and they've gone. Squirrel in Fresno is a fantastic store. And they came and talked to me, and that's what I told them, and they went and did it anyway. And oh my God, it's a fantastic store. And they're very successful, and they've got way more energy than I do at the moment for this trade. That's a fantastic thing when you see that. I guess I should say the ones that don't open are probably successes process as well.
I guess so. Okay, slight shift. If you had to start over from scratch, would you do anything differently? Like if you went back 11 years and you were going to get into this, you decided that you were actually going to do this. You didn't rethink the whole process. Is there something that you wanted your store to be different, that you'd wanted to change?
Well, I did, like a lot of people, I did everything wrong in the beginning. So when people ask me about opening a second store, I tell them I only know how to do it wrong. But so the question then comes up, do you actually know how to do it? Could you do it again? For a long time, I thought the answer was no. There must have been luck involved or whatever. But I've been to a couple trade shows in the last year or two where I've talked to people in the trade who have done their second stores and were like me. They did everything wrong in the beginning, and they have hit the ground running way faster than I thought was possible. If I opened another store, it'd be a lot like the one we have now. There'd be game space. There'd be a lot of inventory, but it would be slowly ramped up. I might do concessions. I don't think it's necessary, but it could be a popular thing, like doing a coffee shop or
more than just a pop fridge and some chips or chocolate bars, things like that, like actually like a cafe style, perhaps?
Cafe style would be cool. I don't know anything about it, and I advise people not to do it if they don't have that experience, but I might do it. There's a really important thing called third place theory, if you know about that, which basically says people have their home, they have their work or school, and they have this third place where they want to spend time and socialize and spend their money and do that. So the game stores are that third place. But if you have concessions, like if you run a coffee shop, you kind of turbocharge your third place. So I'd love to be able to do that if I were to start over again. Even now, looking at additional stores, I'm not sure I would take that risk because I don't know anything about concessions.
So would that be an argument for bringing somebody on who does? If you were to start a store, you'd be like, okay, I've got the game side, and look for a
Yeah,
potential partner who's like, okay, you're a former barista, you know what you're doing here. Would that be a reasonable way to go about that?
it'd be reasonable. I'll tell you another problem I see with stores, even really successful ones, is too many partners. I don't think there's enough money in the game trade for most stores to support more than one person, to be honest. Even big ones, we're not talking a lot of money. When I was brainstorming the first store, I was doing it with a friend who had coffee shop experience. And we were going to do that. We were going to do the coffee shop game store.
Okay.
And eventually he lost interest and I kept doing it. I didn't do a coffee shop. If you have that expertise, maybe a spouse would be a better example.
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of partners.
It sounds like you lucked out there, that your potential partner decided to do something else. If you'd actually like moved ahead and then a year down the road, they're like, man, I'm not really into this anymore. That's like a huge problem because that complicates things.
It's a major reason why stores fail, is that kind of conflict.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear you say that because I've kind of felt that way. And I've had a few other people who've talked about that, who've started a store with partners. And then each one kind of just, they break off and go do something else, and it throws everything into chaos. And each time it's awkward, right? It's a very difficult situation because it can actually destroy the business if things go wrong, if there's no plan to separate, or people can't buy each other out just yet, you can have a major problem.
I've had the problem myself. I do have investors. I own the majority of the store. I own 75%. But I had an investor who initially owned the other 25, and he started his own business around the same time I started this. And he needed his money back.
Yeah.
We didn't have an exit strategy in our LLC agreement, and no instructions on how to evaluate his shares. Right? The way it works with investors is when they want out, they want more than what they put in. Suddenly their shares have lots of value.
Yeah.
Right? So we had to, because there was no agreement, we had to come up with some sort of arrangement to where we would both be happy and he could get out. Eventually we ended up, selling his shares to other people, but again, that whole conversation of like, well, why should they pay what I paid, considering now the business is better off than when I started?
Yeah, technically, he has an argument there, right? Like, they are more valuable because the business now exists and it's actually making a profit. Hopefully,
yeah,
I can see that.
Right now, they don't want to sell their shares and they don't want to let anybody in because they can't agree on what the share values are.
Not a terrible problem to have.
No, if you're gonna, but yeah, I guess my advice would be have a LLC or a corporation and have it very clear what your exit strategy is for investors, and personally have a very clear understanding of what failure looks like for you. So what is it going to take for you to quit? And when you see that, will you do it? You don't want to lose your house, raid your kids' college fund. You want to have a clear idea of failure. And when you get that, accept it and move on.
You don't want to be the last person on the Titanic going under. You want to get off the boat before it sinks. So why did you get investors? When you started the business, did you have investors or did you look for them afterwards for a specific reason?
I started with the idea that I wanted to do it. And then I had a really good friend who has a finance background. He thought I should do it. He knew I wasn't quite ready for it. So he said he would help me with it. He would invest. And I didn't need his money, but I needed somebody else with some expertise on board. So he's the one who kind of shepherded me through writing the business plan, which was a terribly painful process, but very educational. And he went from my finance guy to kind of a cheerleader over time. And I just like having other people that I have to report to, that I can talk to, that can give me feedback, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I get that.
He thinks that's dumb. And he thinks I should buy everybody out, and that it's dumb that I'm doing all the work and they're getting money. But I kind of like having partners that are helping me out, even if they're mostly silent.
Okay, so you didn't need their money for any specific reason? You just wanted to have somebody else kind of involved just to talk to?
Yeah, I kind of needed him in the beginning as the financial guy. I don't think I had the confidence, and I definitely didn't have any business acumen when I started. So I definitely needed him in the beginning. And then when we transitioned into a bigger space it was kind of a reinvestment. But I did need some more money. So I did bring in a few more partners at the junior level who had some money. At that point, the housing market had just crashed. So I did not have the cash cow that was my house to draw from. I needed more money. At this point, they just get checks every month. They're very happy. They don't say anything.
It seems like a good deal for them.
It's very
and
good.
it's a pretty good deal for you, too. If it lets you accomplish the things that you want to get done, it seems like a pretty good way to go about it, right?
It's exactly what it's for. Let me do what I needed to do.
Probably much better than a bank loan or something, paying an absurd amount of interest to your local bank. Seems like
if you can get
less good idea. At the time, I'm sure it was probably pretty difficult.
Even now I have one that's a terrible, terrible loan. It's a bank loan. I mean, it's a thing, but it's not very good.
Yeah, it's a tool, but you don't necessarily want to take it out of the toolbox.
No.
Okay, there was one thing that I did want to ask you specifically. I listened to a podcast recently. There was a podcast called Dylan's Game Design. They talk about Magic in it. Normally they discuss different competitive games and their merits. And they felt that Magic was a poor competitive game. The trading card aspect of it, where you open random cards and booster packs and things like that, and the nature of buying cards for cash made it an uneven playing field. If you had more money, technically you could be more proficient at the game because you could buy more cards. And in a sense, they are right. That's not the best situation for a competitive game, right? That'd be like paying for better chess pieces. But I thought that was an interesting argument, but at the same time, I thought that Magic is... the fact that it is that way gives other people the opportunity to build a business on the secondary market. You can't sell Netrunner cards because it doesn't work that way.
Right. There's this problem in the miniatures market. People want miniatures that are unassembled and unpainted. And then there are people who want miniatures that are painted. The amount you have to pay to buy these painted miniatures is not enough to cover the costs of producing them if you know what you're getting, if they're not collectible. So in order to give you a pre-painted miniature that you know what you're getting, they have to charge you something like 3 to 5 times more than if it was randomized, because the chase element of the randomization is what covers the costs of the miniatures. If that makes any sense. So you kind of that's the only way that model works. Whenever anybody does pre-painted miniatures, that product fails. So you can only have chase miniatures in a random box, or you can have unpainted miniatures. That's kind of where that falls in the spectrum of commerce, which is kind of unusual and interesting, I guess. As far as Magic goes, I have mixed feelings about the gambling nature of Magic. People come to me and they talk about, occasionally I'll get comments about either war games or the satanic nature of Dungeons and Dragons. It's very rare that happens. The ethical thing that kind of bothers me is children coming in buying Pokemon packs, hoping to get the right card. That kind of gambling nature that makes me a little uncomfortable.
Kind of an icky incentive.
It is icky, and the whole game trade is based on icky right now because Magic is so hot. So
it's kind of hard to argue against it too, right? Like it works. Businesses are built off of it.
But it's incredibly effective.
And on that same token, though, businesses are built off of gambling. There are casinos, and I don't think anyone's going to really argue that casinos are a great thing for people or for anyone's individual life, right? You're not going to be like, oh, you should go to a casino. It's going to make your life so much better. Or, cigarettes. There's plenty of businesses built off of cigarettes, but no one's going to say that's a good thing. I hope.
And then you start to ask, is this what I signed up for? My passion is not Magic. Passion is other games, yet I'm making all this money on Magic. Should I have an opinion on that? Should that bother me? I think you have to step back, and I tell myself something I've been telling myself for years, which is I'm going to have to assume that everybody has a budget and a job, and they're all maxing out their 401k, and they're coming through with their disposable income, and this is bringing joy to their lives, right? Otherwise, it'd keep me up at night worrying about, the morality of it all.
Yeah, it can be that's a tough question. It's a tough place to be in. When you become an owner, you kind of feel not necessarily responsible for your customers, but you come to like them, at least. and you want what's best for them. There have definitely been store owners who've come on the podcast and talked about how they know that person is spending their last few dollars opening packs of baseball cards or something. And they shouldn't be doing it, but it's their life, right?
And what are you going to do? You're going to cut them off? I mean, they're not going to go drunk magic and kill anybody. So
Yeah, that's another thing.
It's tough. There's some issues like that. And you want your life to have meaning, and you want your business to be a positive element in the community. And sometimes you have doubts.
Yeah. Now, it's an interesting ethical question that I don't think really gets explored very much. Because people feel like, oh, it's not that complicated. It's just games.
And I know the war games have an element in them that are positive for people. And I know that there are no demons and devils and Dungeons and Dragons because they play it, and there aren't any. But then there's this question of these things that we sell behind the counter in dispensers, very much like cigarettes to small children. That's another question.
Yeah. Let's have some pretty good conversation so far. Is there anything you would want to share with somebody? Specifically, if they wanted to know more about the games business? Was there anything that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I would say that they should definitely look for the resources before they jump. There's a couple Facebook groups, game industry and game store groups that are excellent resources. My blog has a link. If you look for game trade resources on my blog, you'll find a ton of stuff. And there's a couple books out there, but they're hard to find.
I'll make sure to put the links in the show notes for anyone who does want to find or get into some of these Facebook groups. Are they invite only kind of things?
They are. I mean, you have to be very close on the path to opening a store before they'll let you in, because they're very candid groups. They talk about everything out there. A lot of things that they don't want customers to see. There's links on my blog to more public ones. I wish there were more. We were just talking about books today. There's a couple books out there, but right now they're not in print. One of them is about to be available more easily. That's hard to find information.
And that's kind of why I'm doing this whole thing. It is tough to learn about this. There's no college course for this. There's nothing to really set you on the path other than jumping in. And I think that's a big reason why so many people screw it up.
Jumping in, going to trade shows. I bought every book I could find on retail. It turned out that put me light years ahead of a lot of people, because most people that are doing the game trade are all about games, not retail. The business we're in is retail, not games. Most of them have never read a book on retail.
Good recommendation? If there was one book you could say?
If you could buy one book that was available, it would probably be Why We Buy by Paco Underhill. That's fantastic book, but there's been a bunch of others that were of marginal use but still reinforce what I knew. Like one was called Retail in Detail. There are about a half a dozen to 9 books on specific retailing available, and you can usually get them on Amazon for next to nothing used. So there's the books that people should hunt down. Dave Wallace is the name of a store owner who's been around for many years, who's in semi-retirement. He's got the Specialty Retailers. What is it? Specialty Retailers Handbook. His book's available through Alliance Game Distributors. So if someone's a new store owner and they have an Alliance account, they can maybe get the book from them. And then Lloyd Brown has a book that's about to come on the market. It's a game trade retailing book. Right now it's just PDF. I think I have a blog post that lists all that stuff. If you want to link that one.
Yeah, sure. Get that in the show notes. There was something that we skipped over a little bit. We were talking about ethics and happiness specifically. So what does success look like for you? Like, what does that mean to you for your business? What is a successful business to you?
For me, it's doing what I want. If there's things I don't want, if I can delegate those and do the things I do want, I enjoy that. Recently, in the beginning of this year, I stopped working the counter. I told my manager, I don't want to stand here every day anymore. I just can't do this anymore. And it was January, and there's kind of like this postpartum depression that retailers have in January. December is so incredibly busy, and then January is so slow, and you feel like nobody loves you anymore. I just told her, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to work the counter. And she's like, well, don't. It never occurred to me to just not.
You're right. I'm the owner.
I guess I won't. It took a couple months of transition, but I don't work the front anymore. I work the back. And then I waited for the store to fail, and sales went up 25%. Maybe I'm the problem. It's like, no, just take a break. Success for me is being able to do what I want. That could mean working it every day, which is what I did for many years, or it could mean not doing it ever again. It's a very personal question. Eventually, it will mean retirement and having enough money to live on, if that ever happens. Until then, it's building a retirement account, savings for my son's college, that kind of stuff.
The usual life aspirations.
Yeah, doing what I want's the big thing.
It's a good answer.
Yeah.
It's different for everybody as to what it means. Some people, it's success is, like you said, oh, I can pay my employees.
That's great. I know a lot of people that I have kind of envy because they have so much love for the games and the game trade that they would love nothing more than to demo games all day or do game conventions. They want to go run games for game conventions and introduce new people to games. I have a lot of respect for those people, but that's not me. I don't want to do that. We all have our own definitions.
If what you want to do is less day-to-day stuff for the store, what is your ideal situation? If you could say, okay, I've got everything covered, I've got people in place, the business will run somewhat without me. I don't have to be there every single day.
What would you do with the opportunity? There's potentially more stores you could do. Other businesses. I've been interested in opening maybe a different type of retail store because I feel like I understand retail really well. So I'm like, why not open something completely different? But then there's also a lot of risk involved, right? If your success in your first store hasn't amassed you a huge amount of cash and you're leveraging your first store to do your next thing, and
if it doesn't go on the first one,
you fail both directions. So yeah, I don't have an answer right now because I'm kind of at the crossroads. I'm not needed at the store. I don't have enough of a bankroll to do the next thing. I'm doing this construction project, which is kind of my excuse for a next thing.
It's a big change. Yeah, you can see that works fine.
It's a big thing, but I can already tell you it's probably worth 18 months to 2 years of my time, and then I'm going to be in the same boat. It's not looking towards the next big thing. I'm already jumping to the next one. I don't know what it is yet. I'll let you know.
That's good. That's actually what I was going to ask next. Other than your mezzanine and your construction plans, what's in store? What else is coming up?
It's hard to say, and I'll tell you, once you're successful at the first thing, you have a lot to lose. And you're risk averse, which is how competitors sneak up and eat your lunch. So everyone's somewhere on that cycle. That's where I'm.
Okay. If people wanted to come and find you and visit your store, where can they do it? Online and offline.
They go to blackdiamondgames.com, and that will tell them where we are. It'll link them to the blog and our Facebook page where we do a lot of communication with people. We don't do online sales. They can find out where we're at from there.
Perfect. You do Twitter or anything like that? Keep in touch?
I probably should. I just do a lot of Facebook.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. I was very happy to talk to you about your business. It was a lot of fun.
I always enjoy it.
Well, I'll let you get to your store and take care of things.
Okay. Well, thanks.
Yeah. Have a great day. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Gary. Be sure to check the links mentioned in the show notes down below. Also, Amazon Prime Day is coming up July 15th. That may be a good day to pick up some of those books that Gary talked about. If you're interested in running a business that lasts more than a decade, those books are a good start. And if you want to learn more about Game Store entrepreneurship and the Magic community, head over to ManaverseSaga.com because that's the home of the Manaverse Podcast. That's where we put this whole thing together. So head over there and show your support. And as always, thank you for listening.